A winter sky settles into a few steady reference lights, and Orion comes forward almost at once through the familiar line of the belt. Three bright stars rest in a row, even and recognizable, as if they have agreed to hold their places for a long while. Around them the darker sky seems simple. It does not ask for much. The eye finds the pattern easily, and once it has found it, it can remain there without effort. Below the belt, the figure of Orion continues downward into the sword. In that hanging line there is one place that does not look quite like a star. At first it may seem only softer than the others, less exact at the edges, as though a point of light had been breathed upon. Then the impression settles. It is not a sharp pin of brightness. It is a small patch, a suspended blur, a little silver mist resting among the clearer lights. Under a dark sky, the patch can be seen without any optical aid at all. It does not announce itself strongly. It simply remains present long enough to be noticed. The longer the gaze rests nearby, the less it resembles an error of vision, and the more it resembles a true feature of the sky, one that belongs there as naturally as the brighter stars around it. It can seem almost modest in this first view, a misty fleck in the sword of Orion, easy to overlook and then easy to return to. Its appearance is softer than many expect. Photographs often teach the imagination to look for strong color, broad wings, and vivid contrast, but the eye at night usually receives something quieter. The glow is often pale gray-green or silver, or simply a delicate brightening against the dark. The center appears fuller than the edges, but everything remains subdued, as if seen through a thin pane of frosted glass. The nebula does not need richness to be memorable. Its softness is enough. The nearby stars help this softness stand out. They are lantern-like stars, small steady lights with clean boundaries, while the nebula is a pooled brightness, a place where light seems to gather rather than strike. Hard points above and around, and below them a mild haze that seems to have forgotten how to become a point. In this way the sky offers both forms at once, the neat and the diffuse, the lantern-like and the misted. If binoculars are raised, the change is gentle rather than dramatic. The same patch remains the same patch, but it begins to open. The center grows brighter. The surrounding haze extends a little farther than it did to the unaided eye. What had seemed like a small, uncertain blur now appears more settled, more evidently a luminous cloud. It still does not become harsh or busy. It simply gathers itself, like silver mist becoming more visible when a lamp is placed behind it. A small telescope continues this same quiet deepening. The bright middle becomes easier to hold. The glow has more shape to it, though not a shape that insists on one single outline. It may seem broader on one night, narrower on another, depending on the darkness overhead and the steadiness of the air. Even so, the first impression remains faithful. It is still a bright nebula in winter, still a soft cloud in the sword below the belt, still something seen through the tempering veil of distance and darkness. The plainest name for it is the Orion Nebula. That name fits the view well. It says where the patch belongs, and it leaves room for the way it appears, not as a hard-edged object, but as a pale gathering of light in Orion, a little silver mist resting in the sword below the belt. In one familiar catalog it is Messier 42, often shortened to M42. In another it is NGC 1976. None of these names replaces the others. They simply lie together over the same patch of sky, like different penciled notes in the margin of the same page. As the object becomes more familiar, a few internal landmarks begin to hold still within it. Near the center is the brightest and most closely noticed area, known as the Huygens region. The name may sound formal, but the impression is simple enough. It is the brighter pane within the pane, the part where the silver mist seems thickest and most luminous. In many views, the eye returns there first. Brightness gathers there as if the cloud had opened a little, allowing a steadier glow to show through. Close by that brightness, there is also a darker indentation with a memorable name, the fish's mouth. It is a notch within the same field, a small dark shape near the bright center. The contrast is gentle rather than sharp, one bright area and one dark notch, a brighter pane and a darker mark on frosted glass. Once noticed, these two features help the whole nebula feel less vague. The eye no longer drifts across an anonymous blur. It begins to recognize a shape with a center and a hollow, a glow and a pause within the glow. The Orion Nebula is part of a much broader region spread across this area of sky, a large clouded neighborhood known as the Orion Molecular Cloud Complex. The full name is long, but the feeling of it is broad and calm. It suggests that the bright patch in the sword is not alone. It is one visible opening in a much larger field of gas and dust, one brighter place within a more extended dimness. Part of the reason this nebula is so often revisited is that it is relatively near, at least by the standards of the night sky. The exact distance can rest as only a soft fact, something on the order of 13 or 1400 light-years. Far, certainly, and yet near enough to be one of the most familiar large star-forming regions known from Earth. That nearness, if such a word can be used for so great a span, helps explain why this place in Orion has become such a standard point of return. It is bright enough, clear enough in its position, and generous enough in its appearance to be visited again and again. The glow arriving now began its journey long ago and has been crossing the dark ever since. The distance can be felt less as a line on a chart than as a long, quiet interval. The light is faint because it has come far. It is patient because all starlight is patient. This one bright nebula is only one visible part of something broader. Around the silver mist are other veils, other dim forms, other places where stars are forming slowly inside cloud. M42 is the part that declares itself most readily, but it belongs to a wider field. Within that field, the nebula is what astronomers call an H-2 region. The name can be allowed to stay simple. It means a region of hydrogen gas whose atoms have been energized by the light of young, hot stars. Their ultraviolet light passes into the surrounding cloud, and the hydrogen responds by glowing, so the nebula is not merely reflecting light like a pale stone under moonlight. Much of it is luminous in its own gentle way, with atoms taking in energy and giving some of it back. That is why the mist seems lit from within. Hydrogen provides much of the visible glow. Oxygen and sulfur also leave their signatures there, adding to the lines seen in spectra and to the richer colors that cameras can gather over time. In photographs, the nebula often blooms in rose, violet, blue-green, and amber tones, but the eye at the telescope usually receives something quieter. It is more often pale gray-green or silver or a soft wash that seems almost colorless until it is remembered later. The difference is part of its calm character. The photographs show abundance. The eye sees silver mist on frosted glass. Near the center lies the trapezium cluster, a compact grouping of young stars. In steady air and modest telescopes, the brightest four can appear as a tiny geometric arrangement, lantern-like stars resting inside the glow. They are young and luminous, and their presence helps explain the shape of the space around them. Their light and their outward flow of material have gradually cleared and shaped a central cavity within the nebula. Not an empty cavity exactly, but a more open chamber in the cloud, where the inner glow can spread more freely. The surrounding gas has not been pushed away all at once. It has been slowly arranged, softened, and thinned in some places, left denser in others. So the light inside Orion does not move through a simple emptiness. It passes through layers. Some of it comes directly from those central stars. Some strikes dust and is scattered, turned aside, softened, sent outward along altered paths. Some is absorbed by gas and then re-emitted by atoms that have taken in energy and released it again. The brightness reaching Earth is a mixture of many such journeys at once. Direct light, scattered light, newly emitted light, a woven glow rather than a single beam. Dust is especially important in giving the nebula its changing appearance. It both blocks and scatters light. In visible wavelengths, dust can make certain regions look dark, as though parts of the cloud have gone still behind a curtain. Yet the darkness is not always emptiness. Often it is concealment. Behind those dimmer lanes and shaded pockets are stars and warm structures partly hidden from ordinary view. The nebula is full of partial seeing. This is why infrared observations are restful to imagine. Infrared light can pass through much of the dust that stops visible light, and so instruments sensitive to it reveal stars embedded deeper in the cloud, along with warm material and long filaments that the eye alone cannot easily trace. Where visible light offers silver mist and a bright center within a wider haze, infrared can show a denser interior, threaded and populated, with more lantern-like stars behind the veil. Space telescopes have given a clear visible light portrait of the bright central region, while newer infrared views have looked through more of the frosted glass and found further detail waiting quietly there. Even small structures around newborn stars can appear in such studies, little disks of gas and dust held close to their suns. It is enough to know that within the larger mist there are smaller circles, smaller shelters, smaller beginnings. The nebula can be held in several times at once. There is the time of one evening when the sword of Orion rises into view and the small patch of silver mist settles below the three belt stars. There is the time of many winters, long enough to notice how faithfully the figure comes back, almost to the same place, with the same familiar arrangement of lights. And then there is the time inside the nebula itself, where many of the stars are still very young by stellar standards, only a few 100,000 to a few million years into their long existence. This youth gives the region a certain unfinished calm. The larger Orion cloud still holds broad reserves of cold gas and dust. The bright nebula is not a sealed object, complete and separate, but one illuminated part of a wider nursery spread across the sky. In one pocket the gas glows openly. In another, dust lies thicker, like a deeper layer of frosted glass. In another, stars are more exposed. Elsewhere, material remains cool and dim, not yet bright in the same way. So the silver mist is part of an ongoing regional pattern, not a single moment caught and fixed forever. Within that layered space, some of the youngest stars are still accompanied by small disks of gas and dust. These are the protoplanetary disks, often shortened to proplids, and Orion became especially well known for them when detailed images showed how common such close, circling structures can be around newborn stars. They are modest forms inside a vast cloud, little more than compact reservoirs of material held near their central stars, yet they offer a quiet image of duration. Around a small star, dust and gas remain gathered, not scattered at random, but arranged in a disk, a flattened ringed presence, a local orbiting order within the larger silver mist. Some of these disks, when seen closely, show bright edges and gentle tails, shaped by the strong light nearby. Even then, they do not disturb the calm of the scene. They look less like objects in distress than like weathered forms in a luminous environment, each one taking on the shape that local conditions allow. Their outlines can seem almost delicate, small commas or seeds suspended in glow. So the nebula contains many overlapping durations. There is the brief appearance of a winter evening, when the eye first catches the pale patch below Orion's belt. There is the long travel time of the light already on its way, crossing more than a millennium before arriving. There is the youth of the stars in the nebula, measured in spans that still count as early life for stars. There is the persistence of the larger cloud, holding enough cold material for star formation to continue in different places over long ages. And there are the smaller local times of disks circling newborn stars, maintaining their close arrangement while the broader region glows around them. Against these lengths of time, the yearly return of Orion becomes almost tender in its regularity. The constellation leaves and comes back. The sword hangs again beneath the belt. The silver mist resumes its place as though it had only been waiting beyond the season. Nothing in the nebula depends on one winter, or 10, or 50. Yet the human habit of meeting it in winter gives a gentle rhythm to something much larger and slower. That patience of repeated looking gathered slowly around the winter glow below Orion's belt. Long before photographs carried rich color across paper and screens, the nebula was already familiar as a small patch of silver mist, noticed again and again through quiet windows and simple instruments. It did not enter human attention all at once. It settled there by degrees, through return, through naming, through the calm habit of looking where the season had placed it before. In the 17th century, among those early careful watchers was Nicolas Claude Fabry de Peresque, one of the observers who turned a telescope toward Orion's sword and found that the faint blur was not merely a vague softness in the air. Through glass, the mist held together. It had shape, brightness, and a steadiness that invited another look on another winter night. Not long after, Christian Huygens gave a well-known account of the bright inner part of the nebula. That central region still carries his name now, as if one labeled pane of frosted glass had been gently marked so later eyes would know where to rest. It is the part where the brightness gathers most clearly, where the silver mist seems to thicken toward a center without ever becoming hard-edged. Around it the nebula softens outward into haze. Near it the fish's mouth appears, a notch in the luminous cloud, bright center, dark notch. Even before explanation there was description, even before theory there were landmarks. Near the center, within the brightness, the trapezium became another natural point of reference. In a small telescope under steady air, the four brightest stars appear as a compact geometric grouping, lantern-like stars set inside the mist. They do not sit apart from the nebula in the way field stars often do. They seem held by it, as if the silver cloud had left a small opening for their light. As years passed, the nebula gathered more than sketches and descriptions. It gathered catalog names. Charles Messier included it in his catalog, and so M42 became one of its familiar designations. The names do not change the object, but they help hold it steady in shared memory. Orion Nebula M42 NGC 1976, different labels on the same winter mist. Later, another kind of glass was added to the tradition. Spectroscopy did not replace looking, it extended it. The nebula's light, spread and examined, showed that this was not only the blended shine of countless unresolved stars. Some of the glow came from gas itself, made luminous after receiving energy. The cloud was not merely hiding stars in a distant swarm, it was also shining in its own way. Then infrared instruments allowed the screen of dust to become thinner. Looking in longer wavelengths, astronomers could see farther through much of the dust and notice stars and warm structures that visible light only partly suggested. Embedded young stars, fine filaments, and denser pockets within the cloud came into view with more ease. The object remained the same object, only the kind of window changed. The old silver mist was still there, but now there were more ways to understand what lay within it. Space-based observatories continued this long habit of return. Detailed images revealed the small disks around newborn stars with unusual clarity. Inside the broad cloud and bright cavity were smaller circles of dust and gas, delicate forms around lantern-like stars still early in their histories. The scale narrowed, but the feeling remained the same. Careful looking, then naming, then looking again. After all those notes and images, the nebula itself remains much as it first appeared. The bright Huygens region, the dark notch of the fish's mouth, and the same silver mist holding its shape as if seen through frosted glass. It is not a still object, though it can seem that way. The Orion Nebula changes, but with a patience so broad that the eye is forgiven for calling it steady. Night after night, season after season, the same central glow gathers itself in the same place. The same dark indentation rests beside it. The same lantern-like stars near the middle continue to shine from within, giving form to the pale interior. What is moving there is not hurried. What is forming there does not need to be announced. Near the center, the trapezium stars remain a steady, shaping presence. It is easy to imagine their glow not as something abrupt, but as a set of lantern-like stars suspended in mist, illuminating the nearby gas from within. Their presence helps define the bright inner chamber of the nebula, giving the central region its opened appearance, yet even this shaping is gradual. The cavity does not seem to alter from one winter to the next. It is a long conversation between starlight and cloud, carried on in such slow measure that the pattern remains familiar. Because of the dust, visible light offers only one calm version of the place. Infrared views can enter regions that look closed in visible light and show warm threads, embedded stars, and fine structure nested farther inside. Nothing about this changes the older image of M42. Instead, it adds another layer behind the frosted glass. The visible nebula remains the familiar face of the cloud, pale and centered and softly notched. The wider setting matters too, though it need not pull attention far away. M42 rests within the larger Orion cloud, a broad reservoir of gas and dust spread across this part of the sky. The bright nebula is one illuminated portion of that larger body. Beyond the visible center lies more cold material, more sheltered pockets, more places where stars can continue to form over long periods. So even when the eye rests only on the bright center and its neighboring dark lane, the mind can hold a gentler truth around it. This bright opening is part of a much broader cloud, and the cloud itself is patient. Then it becomes natural to ease outward again, away from the inner structure and back toward the winter sky, where the familiar patch in Orion's sword appears under darker conditions, and a few lantern-like stars begin to stand out within the glow. The 3 stars of Orion's belt still do most of the guiding. They remain bright and even, a simple row in the winter sky, and below them the sword descends with a softer pattern. In that lower line, one place does not quite look like a point. It rests there as a faint blur, a pale gathering, a little breath on frosted glass. Under a darker, steadier field, the eye does not have to search very hard for it. The misty patch settles into place and stays there, modest and clear enough in its own quiet way. With binoculars or with a modest telescope, the pale patch begins to gather itself. The center grows brighter than the edges. The glow no longer seems evenly spread, but gently concentrated, as if a lamp were standing behind frosted glass and shining most strongly through one thinner portion. The outer parts remain diffuse, silver, and soft, while the middle seems to hold a little more substance. Near that bright center, one dark indentation begins to matter. It is not large, but once noticed it becomes familiar. The bright center seems to open around it, and the notch gives the glow a more recognizable face. The darker sky helps this contrast. When the field is steadier, the bright center and the dark notch rest together more comfortably. They do not need to be forced into view. The eye can simply remain with them. Under especially steady conditions, the heart of the glow admits another small feature, one that feels less like cloud and more like a compact arrangement of lights. Near the center, 4 bright stars can separate themselves from the surrounding mist. They belong to the trapezium, and in a modest telescope they appear as a tiny geometric grouping, close set and lantern-like within the silver haze. They do not dominate the field. They simply rest there, 4 points gathered near the brightest part, a neat little figure held inside a much larger softness. There is something pleasing in that contrast. Around them the nebula remains diffuse, pale, and clouded. The stars themselves are more definite, though still not severe. Lantern-like stars in a room of mist, a compact shape inside a drifting one. The eye may move from one of the 4 to another, then back outward into the glow, then toward the dark notch, and then outward again to the softer edges where the silver fades into the dark field. What is seen changes a little with each kind of looking. A darker sky allows the mist to be held more steadily. Binoculars gather the light into a brighter middle. A small telescope offers more shape near the center. A slight increase in magnification may enlarge the bright inner region and make the dark notch easier to notice, while a wider view may restore the sense of the nebula as one suspended patch in the sword below Orion's belt. None of these views cancels the others. They simply place the same object behind different thicknesses of frosted glass. After a while, the darker view no longer asks for every small feature to be held at once. The bright center, the dark notch, and the little cluster of lantern-like stars can soften together into broader forms as the whole Orion region begins to feel like one calm field. That broader field opens without effort. The eye no longer stays only with the bright center in the sword, but lets the surrounding dark carry it outward a little, until the familiar glow of the Orion Nebula rests within a larger spread of cloud. M42 remains the easiest part to keep, the clearest bright patch, the place where silver mist gathers most firmly. Around it, the rest of Orion's cloudy country is looser, wider, and less insistent, as if the same pale substance had thinned across a larger pane of frosted glass. Nearby, in the same general neighborhood, lies the Running Man Nebula, another pale gathering in Orion's region. It does not need sharp edges or close inspection. It is enough that it shares the same sky, the same dark field, the same sense of clouds spread across winter. Farther out and broader still, there is Barnard's Loop, a great faint arc curving through Orion's region. It is not a line drawn hard across the sky, but a wide suggestion of form, a sweeping band that helps the whole area feel connected. If the Orion Nebula is a bright lantern behind frosted glass, then Barnard's Loop is like a much larger breath upon the same glass, spread thin and pale, almost more sensed than seen. The lantern-like stars remain useful here. Orion's belt still holds steady above, 3 clear points that do not blur into mist. Below them hangs the sword, and in the sword the nebula rests as the brightest softening in the field. These stars do not explain the cloud so much as accompany it. They keep the scene arranged. They offer simple reference while the finer textures fade. And the textures do fade naturally, as if the sky itself were choosing larger shapes over smaller ones. The bright center becomes one pale body. The neighboring haze becomes one surrounding softness. The broad arc becomes one distant curve. The whole region can then be held in a single impression. A dark pane, a wash of silver mist, a few lantern-like stars, and beyond them more cloud than the eye can comfortably separate. There is something restful in that reduction. The nebula is still what it has always been, a true glowing cloud and not merely a crowded swarm of unresolved stars, yet that fact now sits quietly inside the view rather than standing apart from it. The night feels deeper when the object is allowed to remain almost unchanged in imagination. Year after year, winter after winter, the same bright patch continuing in its patient place within the larger Orion cloud. So the sky simplifies itself. The neighboring veils become only distant companions. The larger cloud becomes not a term to hold onto, but a spacious background, a larger softness behind the one familiar glow. And M42 remains what it has been from the beginning, the easiest silver mist to keep, the brightest patch on the dark pane, a little clearer than the rest. After a while, even the wider landscape begins to loosen. The great arc can fade first into the dark, then the neighboring haze can grow thin, until the field keeps only its simplest arrangement. Orion's belt remains above, the sword remains below, and within it, near one patient glow, a few lantern-like stars continue to rest. Nothing more is required now. The eye does not need the whole field, only this familiar arrangement on a dark winter pane with only a few fixed points. Orion's belt stays above, plain and level enough to guide everything else. Below it hangs the sword, less strict in shape, softer at the edges, and within that hanging line rests the pale cloud that has drawn quiet attention for so long. Under darker sky it can be kept even without any instrument, just as a small misty patch. Not large, not ornate, simply present. It does not resemble the richly colored photographs that so often stand in for it. In this simpler view it is nearer to gray-green or pale silver, or merely a soft brightening in the dark. Silver mist is the better phrase because it leaves room for uncertainty and for calm. The glow does not insist on sharp borders. It gathers itself loosely, as breath might gather on frosted glass and remain there for a moment. If a small telescope is turned toward it, the center grows brighter without becoming busy. The cloud still holds together as one pale glow. Inside that glow, near the heart of it, a compact little pattern begins to rest in view. The trapezium is not large enough to dominate the scene. It is only a neat geometric grouping, a few lantern-like stars gathered close together, suspended in the brighter part of the mist. There is a quiet pleasure in how small that pattern remains. 4 points, close set and orderly, with no need for more description than that. Lantern-like stars within silver mist, a compact figure within a pale cloud. Around them the brighter center of the nebula can be remembered simply as light shaped by nearby stars, a hollowed brightness, an opening in the cloud where the glow seems to gather and spread. It is enough to feel that the stars and the mist belong to one another. As the rest of the sky darkens around it, the nebula often seems steadier, not because it has changed, but because there is less nearby to compete with it. The silver mist settles into its place below the belt. The sword becomes less a line of separate points and more a hanging path that leads down to one pale cloud. The cloud itself becomes easier to remember than to analyze. 3 steady stars above, 1 misty patch below, and if the view allows, a tiny cluster of lantern-like stars resting within. So the sky keeps only what it needs, the belt above, the sword below, 1 pale cloud below 3 steady stars. Everything else can remain outside the frame. The wider arcs and neighboring veils have already gone soft. The named notches and brighter folds no longer ask to be distinguished. They can sink back into the same silver mist from which they came. After a while, even this little arrangement begins to feel less like an object and more like a presence. The belt holds its line, the sword hangs quietly, the nebula keeps its pale place on the dark, frosted glass sky, and the small central stars remain, not bright enough to disturb the calm, only bright enough to anchor it. The few remaining lights hold their places a little longer, Orion's belt above and the sword below, until the bright patch beneath them is no longer a studied object so much as a pale, familiar presence. The silver mist seems to rest behind frosted glass, with only a handful of lantern-like stars keeping it company. It is enough now to let it stay simple. A few steady stars, a pale patch below them, a winter figure that returns and takes up nearly the same place again and again, as if the sky had learned a calm arrangement and saw no need to alter it. The Orion Nebula remains there in its quiet way, one of the nearer great nurseries of stars by the standards of the galaxy, and still far enough that its light has crossed more than 1,000 years before arriving here. What reaches the eye tonight began its travel long ago, and that long travel softens the whole impression even more. The distance does not need to feel large in any sharp or mathematical sense. It can simply feel patient. The glow has been on its way for more than a millennium, moving without haste until it settles into this small mist in the sword of Orion. The belt remains the easiest guide, 3 lights in a row, and below them the sword hangs with its pale mark. That is enough to find it and enough to keep it. Within that pale mark, many paths of light are folded together so gently that they seem like one thing. Some of it is direct starlight from young stars resting within the cloud. Some has touched dust and been turned aside, softened and scattered before continuing on. Some has been given off by gas after it has taken in energy and released it again. All of these quiet routes meet in the same silver mist. The nebula does not send one single beam across space. It offers a blended glow, gathered from gas and dust and stars, and made calm by distance. The dust matters here, though it need not be thought of as an obstacle. It is more like the reason the view resembles frosted glass. Light passes through, but not all in the same way. Some is dimmed, some is redirected. Some is hidden for a while and then met again by other kinds of instruments in other wavelengths without changing the essential character of the place. In visible light, the nebula remains a soft, silver mist, pale and concentrated toward the center. In infrared, warm structure and embedded stars can be met more easily through the dust. These are not different worlds, only different ways of meeting the same quiet cloud. Around it, barely needing attention, lies the larger neighborhood of the Orion cloud. Nearby names can remain only as distant companions in the same region, faint reminders that this pale patch belongs to a wider clouded landscape, but they do not need to come forward. The eye can keep only the central mist and the few guiding stars above it. The page of sky grows plainer now. The fine details that once seemed worth tracing have already softened away. The brighter center is only a gentle thickening of the mist. The lantern-like stars near the heart are small and settled. The surrounding dark is broad and even. Orion's belt keeps its line above, and the sword keeps its downward drift beneath it. The whole arrangement looks less like a diagram and more like a memory held in place. So the Orion Nebula can recede without vanishing. It can become once more what it first seemed to be, a pale cloud below three steady stars, silver against the dark as if seen through frosted glass. Its old light continues to arrive. Its blended glow continues to carry traces of stars, dust, and gas together. Its wider cloud remains around it, mostly unspoken. And the winter sky, unhurried and familiar, asks for nothing more. The mist can remain where it has always been, below the belt, within its larger cloud, carrying old light across a dark and unhurried sky. The lantern-like stars grow quiet, the frosted glass dims, and the silver mist is left as a distant winter trace.